So let's go ahead and bring in CBSN political contributors Lynda Tran and Michael Graham. Lynda is a Democratic strategist and founding partner at 270 Strategies. Michael is a conservative columnist for the Boston Herald and politics editor for NHJournal.com. Thank you both for being here.
Happy to be here.
Michael, let's begin with you. There were 12 Republican senators who voted against the president's plan. Do you think we might see Republican lawmakers split from the president on other issues now?
I don't know that there'll be other issues like this. It involved the constitutional issue, and, Republicans love to have their Tea Party-style debates about the Constitution. But I had to laugh when the president said how courageous those votes were who stuck with him. Let me tell you, Ben Sasse and Tom Tillis did not stick with the president out of courage. It was the opposite. They did not want to get primaried in North Carolina and Nebraska by their fellow Republicans. That's their real issue.
So, Lynda, does this move by the president give Democrats new ammunition to try and legislate against his agenda?
Well, I don't think that this move was necessary in order for Democrats to have plenty of fodder to legislate against what he's been pushing and promoting. I mean, even as he's saying that there's a national crisis on the border, the latest polling shows that a majority of Americans do not agree with him and do not think that he should be declaring a national emergency in order to move money around to build what, many believe to be a vanity project on his behalf. And so I think this is just one item on a very, very long list of potential lines of attack from Democrats.
Well, this has been a very important issue from President Trump, a promise from his campaign. Michael, did the president have no other choice but to veto this or otherwise risk not fulfilling one of his signature campaign promises?
So I've heard from two people in D.C. in the last 24 hours who think that President Trump actually wanted the storyline to go mostly this way. He wanted all the Republicans to stick with him, but it was still going to end up in court no matter what, and that's where it's going to end up now. But his message now to his base is, look how deep the swamp is. Look, they're super swampy. And, with all due respect to Lynda, the fact is the numbers for the past 3 months at the border have been horrendous. And people can see it on TV. There is a problem. Crisis, whatever, we can talk about that. But there's a problem. Trump wants to own the idea that he's the only person in Washington who's willing to be honest about that problem. And so in a way, he would say this is a win for him because it keeps him fighting an issue that he thinks for his 40% is a win.
Well, the president has also asked Friday about the shooting in New Zealand, which claimed 49 lives. He was asked particularly about the shooter and if he sees white nationalism as a rising threat around the world. Here was his response.
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
All right, Michael, I want to start with you. Let's start with what you think of the president's answer. Do you think he should have condemned the shooter's motives a little bit more strongly?
I think that anytime you're saying anything other than this is horrific is a mistake. And, and President Trump has a weakness on this. But the thinking, this is what Trump world will tell you. They will tell you that what is being condemned is not violent white nationalism, which everyone agrees is bad. What they would say is they see in the media all the time that a MAGA hat equals a Klan hood. Therefore, what you're really saying is if you're a Trump supporter, you're a murderer. And that's what they don't want to give any oxygen to. And that's to put his totally in wrong direction, approach. You can see that's where he's coming from.
Lynda, what's the Democratic reaction to this?
I mean, come on. His reaction really, really does take the cake today. I mean, it's bordering on deaf, blind, and dumb. I mean, it goes exactly counter to what the Prime Minister of New Zealand is saying. And this is in response to something that the perpetrators posted a massive manifesto online about. They were very clear that this was anti-Muslim violence, and it is part of a growing tide, a growing trend that we're seeing not only around the globe, but in particular here in the United States. For Donald Trump, somebody who was an apologist for the white supremacists that rallied in Charlottesville, somebody who has time and again tried to make excuses for the reasons why there is a rise in white nationalist crime in this country, it's in step with what he's been saying, but it's totally out of step with reality.
So let's go ahead and switch topics now to Campaign 2020. Earlier this week, former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke announced that, of course, he is joining now the crowded Democratic field. Lynda, what does he bring to the table?
Well, I think if you were to speak to Beto and his team, they would say, above all, what he brings to the table is an understanding of this desire among the electorate to have a direct connection to the candidates who are vying for office in this country. He's somebody who clearly appeals to a millennial electorate. He's somebody who will have the potential to turn out young people in a massive way. And also, you know, coming on the heels of what, albeit was a losing Senate race, was one that was initially perceived as entirely quixotic, and he raised $80 million, setting some records around how much money has ever been raised, really, around a U.S. Senate race. So he comes with, you know, this reputation of having caught some lightning in a bottle, and, you know, they would be lying if any of the other campaigns said that they weren't nervous about the fact that Beto is now in the race.
Well, Lynda, is there a concern among other Democrats about another white male entering the race, especially with Joe Biden poised to announce his campaign?
Well, I think it's a legitimate line of attack or criticism to consider, especially coming on the heels of a wave election for Democrats in 2018 that involved the turnout among communities of color and also elected the most diverse Congress in history. And so it could be a criticism that having a white male is kind of tone deaf to the moment and where the progressive base happens to be, especially when you're sizing up the Democratic primary. But I think that Beto has also tried to address that himself. I think we all saw as part of his Vanity Fair article, he talked about how there were very many talented people of color who are already in the race, and that he understands that there's a certain potential perspective of white male privilege in his candidacy. So it's not something that he's shying away from, and it's also something he's saying that he's going to hope to address by having many people in leadership on his campaign who are from communities of color.
So Michael O'Rourke ran a close campaign against Senator Ted Cruz in a traditionally Republican state. Even though he lost, does the momentum he had and the close nature really of that race present a concern for Republicans about his 2020 chances?
Speaking on behalf of political consultants everywhere, anyone who can raise $80 million for a Senate race right away gets lots of attention. He earned it the old-fashioned way through donations. So yeah, Republicans are focused on this. I think it's interesting that at least two of the Democratic candidates issued fundraising appeals based on the fact that Beto O'Rourke was getting in. So he's getting respect from the rest of the Democratic field as well.
Three of them, in fact.
I'm sorry, I knew about two. Thank you, three. So I talked to some New Hampshire Republicans, Democrats, the last 48 hours. They are kind of cranky. The Bernie Sanders people are cranky because they feel like here's a guy who's really pushing on the ideas of this progressive, if you will, revolution. You know, he wants to do these specific ideas, and he's been championing these ideas. And where was this kid this whole time? Then you have the other people who are kind of cranky because of the, let's not call Beto O'Rourke a white male. He's a rich, elite white male with a billionaire father-in-law who went to prep school, Columbia University, and calls himself Beto as a fourth-generation Irish guy. And so there is definitely, I talked to a Hispanic activist today who said, Julian Castro. What's wrong with Julian Castro? He's former HUD secretary, great on the stump. Come on, what about him? And there's definitely, you're going to see some more of this scorekeeping about how Beto's being treated by the media, by people who are advocating for for candidates of color in the Democratic primary.
So, Lynda, Stacey Abrams, let's talk about her. The former Georgia state legislator who ran for governor in 2018 met with a number of Democratic candidates this week. She's also said a 2020 bid is not off the table. So what do you think her role will be in the race for the White House?
Well, I think it's anybody's guess whether or not Stacey Abrams throws her hat in the ring. I think that she just, by virtue of how electrifying she is, how close the race was this past go-round in 2018 in Georgia, and the fact that she is continuing to beat the drum and advocate on behalf of voting rights in that state and around the country, puts her in a very, very strong position to choose whatever path she wants to take. She's somebody who is excited, progressive Democrats, but also Democrats that are more moderate as well. And, you know, as we saw in her response to the State of the Union, she is pretty compelling and amazing when you have her at the microphone. So I think that, you know, people are watching her very closely because she merits it.
All right, Lynda Tran and Michael Graham, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
President Trump signed his first veto Friday, striking down a bipartisan resolution that would have blocked his national emergency declaration at the southern border. Mr. Trump declared the emergency earlier this year to fund the construction of a border wall at the U.S.-Mexico border. Lawmakers rejected his demands for $5 billion in border security funding. At the White House Friday, the president said there was a crisis at the border and that he was proud to sign the veto.
Defend the safety and security of all Americans, I will be signing and issuing a formal veto of this reckless resolution, and that's what it was. And I have to, in particular, thank the Republican, strong, wonderful people, the Republican senators that were on our side and on the side of border security and on the side of doing what they have to keep our nation safe. They were very courageous yesterday, and I appreciate that very much. Congress's vote to deny the crisis on the southern border is a vote against reality. It's against reality. It is a tremendous national emergency. It is a tremendous crisis.